She took the job because the rent was due, the heating bill was late, and her landlord had stopped pretending to be polite about either. She told herself it was one weekend, 48 hours of smiling at strangers, wearing a dress that wasn't hers, and pretending to love a man she had met exactly twice. What she didn't know, standing in that marble lobby with her cheap heels echoing too loudly, was that pretending is a strange kind of door. You walk through it thinking you're playing a role. You don't realize until much later that the role has been quietly playing you. The rain had stopped an hour earlier, but the city still smelled like wet pavement and exhaust and the kind of cold that lives in your bones in late October. Maren Cole tightened the strap of her duffel bag, looked up at the glass tower in front of her, and tried very hard not to count how many of her monthly paychecks fit into a single floor of the building. She had been told to arrive at 6. She had arrived at 5:49 because she didn't trust the trains, didn't trust the elevators, didn't trust the version of herself that had said yes to this. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A single line. Lobby, now, no, name. No greeting, just the assumption that she would obey. She breathed out through her nose, the way her grandmother had taught her to breathe whenever the world got loud, and she walked through the revolving door. The lobby was the kind of quiet that costs money. Pale stone floors, a sculpture in the center that looked like a frozen wave, a concierge whose suit fit better than anything Maren owned. She didn't have to ask who she was looking for. He was already standing by the elevator bank, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a phone that was clearly more interested in the world than he was. Sebastian Vance. She had seen photos. Photos didn't tell you that a man stood like he had been carved out of patience and disappointment in equal measure. Photos didn't show you the way he turned his head when he heard her heels on the stone, the way his gaze landed on her like a price tag being read. "You're late," he said. "I'm 11 minutes early. By your watch, not by mine." She almost laughed. She caught it just in time and pressed it down between her teeth, because something in his expression told her he was the kind of man who didn't enjoy being laughed at, and she still needed his check to clear. He nodded once toward the elevator. "We have 90 minutes. I'll brief you on the way." "On the way where?" "The airport." She blinked. "Tonight?" "Did your agency not tell you?" "My agency told me a weekend in the city. The weekend is at my family's estate. 3 hours north. The car is downstairs." She stared at him, and for a second she could feel the air shift, that small internal lurch you feel when a plan you thought you understood reveals itself to be something else entirely. She thought about her apartment, her cat being fed by a neighbor for 48 hours, the half-finished mug of tea she had left on the counter because she'd been running late. None of that was usable now. None of that mattered to the man standing in front of her. "Fine," she said. He looked at her then. Really looked. For the first time. Whatever he had been expecting, she could tell he was recalibrating. She didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad one. The elevator opened. He stepped in. She followed. And just like that, the weekend that had been sold to her as easy began to rearrange itself into something else, something she didn't yet have a word for. The car was black, the driver was silent, and Sebastian Vance opened a slim leather folder before they had even left the curb. "Your name this weekend is Maren Cole," he said. "That is my name." "Good, that makes it easier. You met me 8 months ago at a fundraiser in Boston. You work in art restoration, specifically 18th century European oil paintings. You don't talk about money. You don't talk about politics. You don't talk about my brother. If anyone asks how I proposed, I did it on a Tuesday morning, in the kitchen, while you were still in pajamas, because I didn't want it to feel like a performance." A small silence opened up in the car. "Was that important?" she asked. Was what important? That it didn't feel like a performance. He didn't answer right away. His jaw moved, just slightly, like he was tasting the question and deciding whether to spit it out. "It's a detail," he said finally. "Details are what people remember." He handed her a ring. She had been expecting something showy, the kind of thing a man like him would buy when he wanted everyone in a room to know what he could afford. Instead, it was small and old, a thin band of gold with a single pale stone, the kind of ring a grandmother might leave to a granddaughter she actually liked. She slid it onto her finger without comment, and the weight of it surprised her, not heavy but present, like a hand resting on her wrist. "Whose ring is this?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "It does if someone asks." He looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise, but wasn't quite not surprise either. "It was my mother's. And she's gone. 6 years. I'm sorry. Don't be." She would have liked you. She didn't know what to do with that sentence. She didn't know if it was a compliment or an accusation or just a fact, the way he said it, low and even, looking out the window at a city that was beginning to thin into highway. She closed her fingers around the ring and didn't speak for a while. The drive north took the city apart one layer at a time. First the towers, then the bridges, then the suburbs that pretended to be towns, then real towns, with churches, with diners, with main streets where the lights were already strung up for a holiday that was still 2 months away. By the time the car turned off the main road and into a long private drive lined with old maples, Maren had run out of ways to pretend she wasn't nervous. The estate didn't reveal itself all at once. It came in pieces. A gatehouse first, then a curve of trees, then a long, low stretch of stone walls and lit windows, and the smell of wood smoke drifting through the half-open window of the car. The house, when it finally appeared, did not look like the houses she had grown up seeing in magazines. It looked older than that. It looked like it had decided, a long time ago, that it would outlast everyone who lived in it. Sebastian's hand moved to the door before the car had fully stopped. He paused. He didn't look at her, but he spoke. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "stay close to me." "Why?" "Because the only thing my family knows how to do faster than welcoming a stranger is dismantling one." And then the door opened, and the cold air rushed in, and there was a woman waiting at the top of the steps with a smile so warm it almost made Maren forget that warmth could also be a weapon. The woman at the top of the steps was Sebastian's aunt, or the closest thing to it. Her name was Lillian Vance, and she had the kind of presence that didn't fill a room so much as make every other person in it slightly smaller. She came down the steps slowly, deliberately, both arms extended, and folded Maren into a hug that smelled like rosewater and something darker underneath, something Maren couldn't quite place. "So this is her," Lillian murmured against her ear. "He's been hiding you so well, darling. I was beginning to think he'd made you up." "She's real," Sebastian said. "Behind them. I can see that." Lillian pulled back, holding Maren by both shoulders, studying her face the way one might study a painting at auction, and so unspoiled. "Where on earth did he find you?" "Boston," Maren said, because that was the line. "Of course," Lillian said, and her smile sharpened just a fraction, like a knife being turned in the light. "We always did love Boston." Then she let her go, took Sebastian's arm, and walked him into the house without looking back, leaving Maren to follow on her own. Inside, the house was warmer than she had expected. Fires in 2 separate hearths, old rugs that someone had clearly loved, a long hallway lined with portraits whose eyes she could feel even when she wasn't looking at them. There were people everywhere. Cousins, family friends. A man in a navy sweater who introduced himself as the family lawyer in a tone that suggested he was something more than that. A woman with silver hair and a glass of red wine who looked at Maren for a long moment, said nothing, and walked away. Maren felt the ring on her finger as if it had its own pulse. Sebastian appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne, pressed one into her hand, and bent toward her ear. "Breathe," he said. "I'm breathing. Slower. I'm breathing as slowly as I can while wearing this dress." His mouth twitched. Not a smile. The suggestion of a smile. The shadow a smile makes when it's deciding whether to land. "Come meet my brother," he said. They crossed the room. A man was standing by the window with his back to them, tall and lean, hair the color of old wheat. When he turned, Maren understood several things at once. She understood that he was younger than Sebastian by a few years. She understood that he was the kind of handsome that people forgive a lot of things for. And she understood, in a single small flicker that she would replay later when she was alone, that Sebastian had not told her everything about why he needed a fiancé this particular weekend. "Theo," Sebastian said. "This is Maren." Theo Vance smiled, and his smile reached his eyes the way Sebastian's didn't, and he took Maren's hand and held it for a beat too long. "Well," he said, "you weren't joking. I rarely joke." "No," Theo said, "you don't. But this I have to admit, brother, this I didn't see coming." He let her hand go. He looked at her once more, with a curiosity that wasn't unkind, but wasn't entirely innocent either. Then he turned to Sebastian, and his voice dropped a note. "Mother's room is open if you'd like it. I had them air it out." "We'll take the East guest suite," Sebastian said. "Of course you will," Theo said. And there was something underneath that sentence, something old and unfinished, and Maren felt it pass between the 2 brothers like a draft moving under a door. Dinner that night was long, and Maren didn't remember most of it. She remembered the soup, which was good. She remembered the bread, which was warm. She remembered the way Lilian asked her 3 different questions about her grandmother that she had not been briefed on, and she remembered the way Sebastian's hand found her knee under the table the 3rd time she hesitated. Steady and quiet. A single small instruction in the language of touch. "Don't worry. I'm here." She remembered Theo watching that hand. She remembered the lawyer, the one in the navy sweater, asking Sebastian a question about a board vote that wasn't supposed to happen until December, and watching his face go very still. She remembered the way Lilian lifted her glass at the end of the meal and said, "To the future Mrs. Vance, may she be brave enough for this family." She remembered the laugh that went around the table, and how none of it sounded like a laugh. By the time Sebastian led her up the wide staircase to the East Wing, she was tired in a way that wasn't physical. The East guest suite was beautiful, the way old beautiful things are beautiful quietly, without trying. Tall windows, a 4-poster bed with linen curtains, a small fireplace already lit, the wood crackling softly. 1 bed. She looked at it. She looked at him. He was already taking off his cufflinks, slowly, methodically, the way a man takes apart a problem he has been carrying all day. "I'll take the chaise," he said. "It's fine. You'll wreck your back. I've had worse." "I don't doubt it." She sat down on the edge of the bed and slipped off her shoes. The silence in the room was not comfortable, but it was not unkind either. It was the silence of 2 people who didn't yet know how loudly the next 48 hours were going to ask them to perform. "Sebastian," she said. Your brother." He paused with one cufflink in his palm. "What about him? He didn't know I was coming." "No. But you knew." "He didn't know." "Yes." "Why?" He set the cufflink down on the dresser, very carefully, like setting down a thought he didn't want to break. "Because if he had known," he said, "he would have arrived with someone of his own, and then this weekend would have been a competition instead of a question." "What's the question?" He looked at her. The fire moved in his eyes for a half second before he looked away. Whether I'm the kind of man who can be trusted with what my mother left behind, he said. And then he turned off the lamp. The first night, Maren did not sleep. She lay in the four-poster bed in the dark, listening to the small sounds of an old house, the wood breathing, the wind testing the windows, the occasional distant click of someone walking on a floor far away. The chaise where Sebastian was sleeping was angled so she couldn't quite see him without turning her head, and she didn't turn her head, because something about turning her head felt like an admission she wasn't ready to make. She thought about her apartment. She thought about her grandmother, who had raised her in a small town 3 states south, in a house with a yellow kitchen and a porch that creaked in the heat. She thought about how her grandmother used to say that lies were like coats you could put one on for warmth, but you had to remember to take it off before you went to bed, or you'd suffocate in your sleep. She wondered, lying there in a borrowed nightgown in a borrowed bed in a borrowed life, what time the coat was supposed to come off in this particular story. She must have slept eventually, because she dreamed. In the dream, she was standing in her grandmother's kitchen, and the ring on her finger was burning, but not painfully warmly, like a small private fire. She woke just before sunrise. The chaise was empty. Sebastian was standing at the window, already dressed, a coffee in his hand, looking out at a lawn still silver with frost. She watched him for a moment before she let him know she was awake. He was different in the early light, less armored. The line of his shoulders was lower than it had been the night before. The expression on his face was the expression a man wears when he thinks no one is watching, and Maren understood, in a way she could not have explained, that this was the version of him she was going to have to be careful with. Not the cold one, not the controlled one. This one, the one who was tired. He turned. He saw her looking. He didn't pretend he hadn't been caught. "Coffee?" he said. "Please." He poured a cup from a small pot on a tray she hadn't noticed and brought it to her. His fingers brushed hers when she took the cup. Not on purpose, not by accident either, somewhere in between. "What's the schedule today?" she asked. "Breakfast at 9. The walk through the gardens at 11. Lunch at 1. The reading at 4. The reading of my mother's letters." It's a family tradition. Every October, on her birthday, my aunt reads from a stack of letters my mother wrote during the last year of her life. To us. To herself. To no one in particular. Maren held the coffee in both hands. "And I'm there for that?" "Your family this weekend." "Sebastian, I know how it sounds." "Do you?" He looked at her over the rim of his own cup, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something that wasn't calculation in his face. She didn't know what to call it. She wasn't sure he did either. "If you want to leave," he said, "say so now. I'll have the car back in 20 minutes. I'll pay you the full fee. No one will ever know you were here." She thought about it. She thought about the cold of the morning, the long drive home, the small, ordinary safety of her own apartment. She thought about the ring on her finger and the way it had warmed in her dream. She thought about Lillian's smile and Theo's eyes and the silence at the table when the lawyer in the navy sweater had spoken. And then she did the thing she would later be unable to explain, even to herself. She said no. "I'll stay," she said. "Okay," he said. He didn't thank her. She was glad he didn't thank her. A thank you would have made it a transaction again, and somewhere in the dark of the previous night, without either of them noticing, the transaction had developed a second layer underneath it. Breakfast was in a long sunroom that faced the lawn. There were more people than there had been at dinner. Some of them Maren had met, some of them she hadn't. A girl of about 12 in a yellow sweater came over and sat next to her and asked her if it was true that she could clean a painting with bread, and Maren laughed for the first time since arriving, and said that yes, in a way it was true. that baker's bread had been used for centuries to lift grime off old varnish, and the girl listened with the serious attention of a child who has decided, in that moment, to take you on as a project. The girl's name was Wren. She was Theo's daughter from a marriage that had ended 3 years earlier. She did not look at Maren the way the adults looked at Maren. She looked at her like she was real. By the time breakfast was over, Maren had agreed to show Wren how to make a sketch of a leaf without lifting the pencil, and Wren had agreed to show Maren the place in the garden where the apples were the sweetest. And somewhere across the table, Sebastian had watched this whole exchange happen without saying a word. His coffee cup halfway to his mouth, his face very still. The gardens were vast. They walked them slowly, in groups of 2 and 3. Lillian took Maren by the elbow at one point and steered her gently away from the others, down a gravel path lined with low boxwood, and Maren felt herself being maneuvered the way a chess piece is maneuvered, calmly, without hurry, with intent. "Tell me, dear," Lillian said. "Tell you what? How you met him. I want to hear it from you." He tells the story like a press release. Maren told her the story, the fundraiser, the Tuesday morning, the pajamas. She told it the way Sebastian had given it to her, every detail in place, and Lillian listened with her head tilted slightly, the way a bird listens to something underground. When Maren finished, Lillian was quiet for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "Is that a good thing?" "It's a curious thing." She patted Maren's arm. "Be careful with him, dear. He has been bracing for impact for so long that he has forgotten what it feels like to be touched gently." And then, without waiting for an answer, she turned and rejoined the group, leaving Maren standing in the middle of a gravel path, with the strange sensation that she had just been warned and welcomed at the same time. The reading that afternoon took place in the library. It was a room with a high ceiling and a smell of old paper, and the chairs had been arranged in a loose half-circle around a single armchair, where Lillian sat with a stack of letters in her lap. The fire was lit. The light was low. People came in slowly and sat without speaking, and Maren felt, sitting next to Sebastian in the front row, that she had wandered into a ritual older than any of them. Lillian read for almost an hour. The letters were funny, sometimes, and very small, and very particular, a sentence about a robin that had landed on the kitchen windowsill, a paragraph about the weight of a pear in the hand. Sebastian sat very still beside her, and Maren did not look at him, because looking at him would have been an intrusion. She listened, and then, near the end, Lillian opened a letter that was different from the others. Maren could feel it in the room before Lillian had even read the first line. The quality of the silence changed. "To my older son," Lillian read, "You will read this when I am gone, and you will be 29 years old, and you will already be too serious for your own good. I have one thing to ask of you, and only one. Do not let this house become your prison. Do not let what your father built become what defines you. Find someone who makes you laugh in rooms where you are not supposed to be laughing. Marry her, if she will have you. And if she will not, love her anyway. Love is not a contract. It is a window." Lillian stopped reading. She folded the letter slowly and laid it on top of the stack. She did not look at Sebastian. No one did. Maren did not turn her head, but her hand, very quietly, found his under the arm of the chair. She did not squeeze. She just let her fingers rest against his, the way you might rest a hand on the rim of a glass that is on the edge of a table. His hand did not move, but after a long moment, his thumb did. It moved once, against the side of her finger, a small, slow stroke, like a sentence being underlined. And Maren thought, with a clarity that frightened her, this is the moment. This is the moment the coat starts to feel like skin. That night, there was a dinner in the long dining room, candles down the length of the table, More people than there had been the night before. Friends had arrived from the village. A second cousin had flown in from somewhere overseas. The lawyer in the navy sweater was there again, and so was a woman in a green dress whom no one had introduced, but who looked at Sebastian with the proprietary half-smile of someone who had once believed, however briefly, that she would be the one sitting in Marin's chair. Marin noticed her. She noticed her noticing. She did not say anything. Halfway through the meal, the woman in the green dress lifted her glass and said, in a voice pitched just a little too loud for the size of the room, "I have to say, Sebastian, congratulations. Truly, none of us thought you'd actually go through with it." A small laugh moved through the table. It was not unkind. It was the laugh of people who knew something the new arrival did not. Sebastian set his fork down. Go through with what, Camille? Marriage, settling, letting someone in. The woman in the green dress smiled at Marin, the way a cat smiles at a wren. She must be very patient. She is, Sebastian said. But patience isn't what she is. Oh? What is she, then? He looked at Marin. He looked at her for what felt, to Marin, like a long time, long enough that she had time to understand that whatever he said next was not in the script, and that he knew it, and that he had decided not to care. "She's the first person," he said slowly, "who has ever made this house feel like a place I might be allowed to come home to." The table went quiet, not the polite quiet of a paused conversation. The other quiet. The kind that arrives when someone has accidentally told the truth in a room that wasn't ready for it. Lillian was the one who broke it. She lifted her glass, slowly, almost lazily. "Well," she said, "then I suppose we should let her stay." A laugh went around the table again, but this one was different, looser, warmer, on the right side of the line. Conversation resumed. The woman in the green dress smiled, and her smile did not reach her eyes. Marin did not look at Sebastian for the rest of the meal. She didn't trust her face. After dinner, the family scattered, some to the drawing room, some to the porch with cigars, some upstairs. Sebastian touched the small of Marin's back as they left the dining room and steered her, without speaking, through a side door and down a short corridor and out onto a small stone terrace that faced the eastern lawn. The night was very cold. The sky was very clear. He shrugged out of his jacket and put it over her shoulders before she could refuse it. And she didn't refuse it, because refusing it would have meant admitting that she had wanted it. "Why did you say that?" she asked. "Say what?" "Don't." He exhaled. His breath made a small white cloud in front of him. "I don't know," he said. "Yes, you do. I know what I said. I don't know why I said it like that. Sebastian, yes, when this weekend is over." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. He looked at her, and the moonlight made his face look younger and older at the same time, the way moonlight will do to a face that has been holding too much for too long. "I know," he said. "Do you? When this weekend is over, you'll go home, and I'll go back to my office, and the only thing that will be different is that the people in there," he tilted his head back toward the house, "will believe a story they wanted to believe in the first place. That's what I'm paying for. That's what we agreed to." "Yes, yes," a long silence. "And yet," she said, very quietly, "you said what you said." "And yet," he said. He turned to face her. He did not touch her. He could have. He didn't. "Marin, yes, I don't want to make you part of something you didn't sign up for." "What did I sign up for exactly?" "A weekend. Yes, 48 hours of pretending. Yes, I'm going to be honest with you," he said, "and I am not going to enjoy it." She waited. "I didn't think I would like you," he said. "I assumed you would be someone I could politely tolerate for 2 days." I budgeted for that. I prepared for that. I did not prepare for the rest. The rest. Yes, what's the rest? He looked at her for a long beat. The cold pressed in around them. Somewhere in the house, someone was playing a piano, badly, lovingly, the way people play pianos at family gatherings when no one is really listening. The rest is the part I don't have a name for, he said. Yet, she didn't answer. There was no answer for a sentence like that. Or rather, there were too many answers, and choosing one would mean losing the others. And she wasn't ready, standing on a frozen stone terrace in a borrowed jacket, to lose anything. After a while, he reached out, very slowly, and tucked a piece of her hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm against her skin in a way that did not match the cold around them. He did not kiss her. He did not try. He simply touched her, once briefly. The way a person touches something they are afraid will not be there in the morning. Then, he stepped back. "We should go in," he said. "Yes," she said. They went in. The next morning was Sunday. Maren woke before the sun this time, and Sebastian was still asleep on the chaise, one arm thrown across his face like a man hiding from a memory. She watched him for a moment in the dim light, and then got up, very quietly, and went to the window. The lawn was white with frost. The fields beyond it were silver. A single deer was standing at the edge of the trees, head up, ears forward, listening to something Maren could not hear. She thought, today is the last day. She thought, tomorrow I go home. She thought, I do not know what home means in this sentence anymore. There was a soft knock at the door. She crossed the room and opened it, holding the robe closed at her throat. Ren was standing in the hallway in pajamas and a coat thrown over them, holding 2 apples. "I picked these," Ren whispered. "You said you wanted to know which ones were sweet." Maren smiled. She took the apples. She knelt down so she was at Ren's height. "Thank you," she said. "Are you going to marry Uncle Seb?" Ren asked. Maren paused. "That's the plan," she said. "Good," Ren said. "He needs someone." Then, Ren turned and ran off down the hall in her socks, and Maren closed the door very softly and stood there for a long time with the 2 apples in her hand, feeling something inside her chest perform a small, irreversible rearrangement. Breakfast on Sunday was lighter. People were leaving. Bags were appearing in the front hall. The lawyer in the navy sweater shook Sebastian's hand on his way out, looked at Maren once, said, "It was a pleasure," and walked out into the cold without elaborating. Lillian found Maren in the kitchen, where she had escaped under the excuse of needing more coffee. "Dear," Lillian said. "Yes?" "Walk with me." They walked. Not far. Just to the edge of the kitchen garden, where the herbs had gone brown and a small stone bench faced a fountain that had been turned off for the season. Lillian sat down. She did not invite Maren to sit. She simply waited until Maren sat anyway. "I want to tell you something," Lillian said. "All right. I have known Sebastian since the day he was born. I held him before his own mother did. She was very tired. I held him for almost an hour." She paused. "He has been a serious child, and a serious boy, and a serious man, and I have spent most of my life waiting for someone to be foolish with him." Maren did not speak. "Are you that person?" Lillian asked. Maren took a breath. "I don't know," she said. "That," Lillian said, "is the right answer." She patted Maren's hand. She got up. She walked back to the house without another word, and Maren sat on the bench for several more minutes, watching her own breath in the cold, listening to the small, distant sounds of a family preparing to disperse. Sebastian found her there. He didn't ask what she was doing. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He simply sat down on the bench next to her, careful to leave a foot of space between them, and looked at the fountain that wasn't running. "My aunt is fond of you," he said. "Your aunt is dangerous. Both of those things can be true." She laughed. It surprised her. He turned to look at her when she laughed, and there was something open in his face, something she had not yet seen, and she understood that what was open in his face was a question. "We leave in 2 hours," he said. "I know. The agreement," he said, slowly, "is that when we get into that car, the weekend ends. We drive back to the city. I drop you at your apartment. We do not see each other again." Yes, that's the agreement. Yes, he did not look at her. He looked at the fountain. "Maren," he said. "Yes, if, when we are in that car, I were to ask you a question." She waited. "If I were to ask you," he said, "whether the agreement could be renegotiated." A long silence. "What kind of renegotiation?" she said, carefully. "The kind," he said, "where neither of us is pretending anymore." She did not answer right away. She did not trust the answer that was already rising in her throat. She made herself sit with it. She made herself count to 10 in her head, the way her grandmother had taught her to count when a big decision was waiting to be made too quickly. "Ask me in the car," she said finally. He nodded. "All right." They did not look at each other for a long time after that. They watched the fountain that wasn't running, and the cold sat around them like a third person, patient and unhurried, waiting to see what they would do with what they had just said. The drive back to the city was quiet. Not the silence of strangers. Not the silence of estrangement. A different silence. The silence of two people who had said almost everything they needed to say, and were now waiting for the road to bring them to the place where they would have to say the last of it. The fields went by. The towns went by. The bridges came back. Then the suburbs. Then the towers. The sun was setting when they turned onto the avenue that led to Maren's neighborhood. The light through the windshield was the color of a peach that had been left on a counter too long, soft and bruised and almost over. Sebastian did not speak until they were 3 blocks from her apartment. "Maren." "Yes. May I ask my question?" She turned in her seat to look at him. The driver was very politely not listening. The city outside was very politely going about its evening. "Yes," she said. He took a breath. He held it. He let it go. "Would you," he said, "be willing to do this again?" "Do what again?" "Not a weekend." She waited. "Not a transaction, not a contract, not a job your agency sends you to. Would you be willing," he said, "to let me try, properly, from the beginning, as myself, to take you to dinner, in a place where neither of us is being watched, to call you on a Thursday, because I have nothing to say, but want to hear your voice, to learn what you like in your coffee, to find out whether what I felt on that terrace last night was a feeling, or a circumstance." She stared at him. The car had slowed in traffic. The light from a street lamp moved across his face and went away again. "You're asking me out," she said. "I'm asking you to let me start over. From zero." From zero. She thought about her apartment, 2 blocks away. She thought about her cat, who was probably angry. She thought about her grandmother, who had been gone for 4 years and would have had things to say about a man like Sebastian Vance, some of them tart, some of them generous. She thought about Wren, and the apples, and Lillian's hand on hers. She thought about the woman in the green dress, and the lawyer in the navy sweater, and the letter about windows. She thought about the version of herself that had walked into that lobby on Friday evening, nervous, hungry, willing to be small for 48 hours in exchange for a check. She thought about who that woman had been. She thought about who she was now. "Yes," she said. He closed his eyes. Just for a second, The kind of second a man uses when he has been bracing for a different answer for so long that the right answer takes a moment to be believed. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me." "Why not?" "Because thank yous turn things back into transactions." He almost smiled. "All right." The car pulled up at her building. The driver got out. The driver opened the door. Sebastian got out first and offered her his hand, and she took it, and she stepped out into the soft, bruised evening light of her own street, with a duffel bag in one hand and a ring she had not yet given back on her finger. She looked down at the ring. "Sebastian." "Yes, your mother's ring. Keep it." "I can't." "For now." She looked at him. "For now," she said. He nodded. He held the door for her. He waited until she was inside the lobby. He did not kiss her. He did not try. He simply stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets, watching her go in, and when she turned at the elevator to look back at him through the glass, he was still there, and he lifted one hand, and she lifted one hand, and the doors closed. She went up to her apartment. She unlocked the door. The cat came to the door and complained. The half-finished mug of tea was still on the counter where she had left it. The radiator was clicking. Everything was exactly the way she had left it. Nothing was the way she had left it. She set the duffel bag down. She slipped off her shoes. She walked to the window and looked out at the street, and the black car was still there, and Sebastian was still standing beside it, looking up. He saw her. He nodded once. He got into the car. The car pulled away. She stood at the window for a long time after that, the ring warm on her finger, the city quiet around her in the way the city is quiet on a Sunday evening when everyone is home. And she understood, finally, what her grandmother had meant about coats. You could put one on for warmth, yes, you had to take it off before you went to bed, yes, but sometimes rarely. But sometimes what you thought was a coat turned out to be the first layer of a new self you hadn't known you were ready to become. She did not take it off that night. She slept in it. She slept better than she had slept in years. And outside, in the city, somewhere across the river, in an apartment she had not yet seen, a man who had spent his whole life bracing for impact was lying awake in the dark, smiling at the ceiling for no reason he could name, and learning, for the first time, what it felt like to have somewhere to come home to. She did not hear from him on Monday. She told herself this was fine. She told herself a man like Sebastian Vance had things: a company, a board, a brother, a house full of people who needed managing, and that a Thursday phone call promised on a Sunday evening did not obligate a Monday text. She told herself this while she stood in front of a painting at the studio, a small water-damaged portrait of a woman in a blue dress, and very carefully did not check her phone for 3 hours, and then checked it anyway, and found nothing, and told herself again that this was fine. The painting was from 1782. The woman in the blue dress had a face that someone had loved enough to commission, and then, somewhere across 200 years, forgotten enough to leave in a basement. Marin's job was to lift away the grime without lifting away the woman. It was delicate work. It required patience. It required the willingness to spend an entire afternoon recovering a single square inch of a cheek. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. She had a talent for restoring things other people had given up on, and she had never once stopped to consider what that talent might mean about her. Until now, standing in front of a forgotten woman in a blue dress, thinking about a man who had not texted. Her phone buzzed at 4:11. She did not lunge for it. She finished the brushstroke she was on. She set the brush down. She wiped her fingers on the rag at her hip. And then, calmly, the way a person opens a letter they have already decided not to be hurt by, she picked up her phone. This is Sebastian. I'm told it's customary to wait 3 days before calling. I lasted one. I'd like to take you to dinner Thursday. There's a place that doesn't have a sign on the door, which I'm aware sounds insufferable. It's just good. Will you come? She read it twice. She typed back, "A place," with no sign. "How will I find it?" The reply came fast. "I'll find you, 7 p.m. I'll text the address Thursday morning, so you have time to be appropriately suspicious." She smiled at the painting. The woman in the blue dress did not smile back, but she looked, in the late afternoon light, slightly less forgotten than she had that morning. Thursday came slowly, and then, all at once, the way Thursdays do when you are waiting for them. The place did not have a sign. It had a door, painted the dark green of a holly leaf, between a shuttered tailor's shop and a flower stand that was closing for the night. Sebastian was already there when she arrived, standing under the small light above the door, and he was wearing a coat instead of a suit, and the absence of the suit changed him more than she had expected. He looked, for the first time, like a man, and not like a position. "You found it," she said. "You doubted me. I was appropriately suspicious. As instructed." "Good." He held the green door open. "After you." Inside, the restaurant was small and warm and dim. 8 tables, a low ceiling, a kitchen you could see into through a wide window where 2 people moved around each other with the unhurried choreography of people who had done this 1,000 times. There was no menu. There was a woman who came to the table and told them what there was, and what there was sounded like things someone's grandmother might have made if someone's grandmother had been very, very talented. They ordered by pointing and trusting. And then, with the ordering done and the wine poured and the excuse of logistics removed, they were simply 2 people sitting across a small table from each other, with nothing left to do but the thing they had come to do. "So," Sebastian said. "So, from 0. "From 0, she agreed. "All right, I'll start." He turned his wine glass a quarter turn on the table, a small gesture she was beginning to recognize as the thing he did when he was deciding how honest to be. "My name is Sebastian Vance. I'm 34. I run a company my father built and never trusted me to run, which I have spent 6 years proving I can run, to a man who has been dead for 2 of them. I have a brother I love and don't understand, a daughter-shaped person in my life named Wren whom I would walk into traffic for, and an aunt who terrifies me. I work too much. I sleep badly. I have been told, by more than one person, that I am difficult to know." He paused. "I find I don't want to be difficult to know anymore. At least not to you." Marin held very still. "Your turn," he said. She took a breath. "My name is Marin Cole," she said. "I'm 31. I restore paintings that other people have given up on. I was raised by my grandmother in a town you've never heard of, in a house with a yellow kitchen, and she died 4 years ago, and I still reach for the phone to call her about twice a week before I remember. I took your job because my rent was due, and my heat was about to be turned off, and I was tired, in the specific way you get tired when you've been doing everything alone for a long time." She paused. "I did not expect to like you. I budgeted for tolerance. I prepared for tolerance. I did not prepare for the rest." He smiled then. Fully, for the first time since she had met him. It transformed his face the way light transforms a room you thought you knew. "That's my line," he said. "I'm a restorer," she said. "I improve things." The food came. It was extraordinary. They talked for 3 hours, and the talk moved the way good talk moves, without anyone steering it, into corners neither of them had planned to visit. He told her about his father, the cold of him, the way the man had measured affection in performance reviews. She told him about the winter her grandmother got sick, the long drive back and forth, the way she had learned to clean paintings in a hospital waiting room because she needed something to do with her hands that wasn't worrying. He told her about his mother, the letters, the window. "Do you think she was right?" Marin asked. "That love is a window, not a contract." He was quiet for a moment. I spent a long time thinking she was being sentimental, he said. My father read me that same letter once, years before Lillian started reading them aloud. He read it like he was reading a weakness out loud, like he was pointing at the place where she was soft. He turned his glass. I think I believed him. For a long time, I think I built a whole life on the idea that the contract was the safe thing and the window was the dangerous thing. And now? He looked at her across the small table, in the dim, warm light, with the no-sign restaurant quiet around them. Now I think, he said, that a contract keeps the weather out, and a window lets you see that there's a world, and that I have spent 34 years in a very well-sealed house, congratulating myself on how dry I was. Maren did not say anything. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, and this time she did squeeze, gently, and he turned his hand over so their palms met, and they sat like that for a while, two people who had each spent a long time keeping the weather out, discovering that they did not, after all, mind getting a little wet. The weeks that followed were unhurried. This surprised her. She had expected, from a man who texted lobby, now a certain velocity. Instead, he was patient in a way that felt almost old-fashioned. He called on Thursdays, exactly as he had promised, and sometimes on other days too, and the calls were not about anything, which is the best kind of call. He learned how she took her coffee. He learned that she hummed when she was concentrating and did not know she did it. He learned that she did not like to be rushed, and he stopped rushing. She learned things too. She learned that he was funnier than he let the world see, dry and quiet and quick. She learned that he was tender with Ren in a way that he did not seem to know was visible. She learned that he kept his mother's letters in a drawer in his study and did not read them, because reading them was Lillian's job, and that this was the closest thing the man had to a religion. She went back to the estate twice that fall, not as a fiancée, as herself. The first time, Lillian opened the door and looked at her and said only, "You came back," in a voice that suggested this was both expected and remarkable. The second time, Ren ran down the steps and threw her arms around Maren's waist before Maren had even gotten out of the car, and Sebastian stood at the top of the steps, watching, and the look on his face was the look of a man watching two halves of his life decide, on their own, to fit. It was not perfect. She wanted to be clear about that, later, when people asked. He was difficult. He had been right about that. There were nights he disappeared into his work and forgot she existed, and there were mornings he was so wound with some board fight or other that he was nearly impossible to be near. There was a fight in December, a real one, about whether she would give back the ring she had tried to, more than once, and he had refused to take it, and finally she had put it in a small box and left it on his desk with a note that said, "This is your mother's. It belongs to your family. I am not yet your family," and he had not spoken to her for 3 days, and on the 4th day he had appeared at her studio with the box in his hand and his face undone. "You're right," he had said. "It belongs to my family. So I'm asking you. Not for a weekend, not for a performance, not for a board, or an aunt, or a story anyone wants to believe." He had opened the box. "I'm asking you to make the note untrue." She had cried, which she had not planned to do, standing in front of a half-restored portrait of a woman in a blue dress. "That's a terrible proposal," she had said, crying. "There's grime on your hands. You smell like turpentine." "That's you," he said. "You smell like turpentine. You always smell like turpentine." "Sebastian, Maren, ask me properly." So he had gotten down, on one knee, on the paint-stained floor of a restoration studio, in front of a forgotten woman who had been loved enough to be painted, and then forgotten enough to be left in a basement, and then found, at last, by someone whose whole talent was for finding the things other people had given up on. "Will you marry me?" he said. Not because the rent is due. Not because anyone is watching. Because I would like, very much, to spend the rest of my life learning how you take your coffee. I take it the same way every day, she said. You already know. I'd like to keep being sure. She said yes. Of course she said yes. They were married in the spring at the estate, in the garden where Wren had picked the sweet apples, under the maples that had decided long ago to outlast everyone. It was small. Lillian cried and pretended she had something in her eye. Theo gave a toast that started as a joke and turned somewhere in the middle into something real and unguarded, an apology folded inside a blessing, and the two brothers had embraced afterward in a way Maren suspected they had not done since they were boys. Wren was the flower girl and took the job with the total seriousness of a child who has been trusted with something important. The lawyer in the navy sweater was there. He shook Sebastian's hand and said, "It was a pleasure." Exactly as he had the first time. And this time, it sounded like it meant something. Maren wore her grandmother's earrings and Sebastian's mother's ring, and somewhere in the middle of the ceremony, in the part where you are supposed to be paying attention to the words and instead find your mind floating free, she thought about the woman in the blue dress, and about coats, and about windows, and about the strange truth she had stumbled into on a cold October weekend, that the things we do for the wrong reasons sometimes carry us, without our permission, into exactly the right life. That evening, after the guests had gone and the candles had burned low, and Wren had fallen asleep on a sofa in the library with an apple in her hand, Sebastian found Maren on the small stone terrace where it had all started, the one facing the eastern lawn. He put his jacket over her shoulders before she could refuse it. She didn't refuse it. "Do you remember," he said, "what I told you on this terrace, the first night? You told me a great many things on this terrace. I told you there was a part of it I didn't have a name for. Yet, I remember. I have a name for it now." She turned to look at him. The night was cold, and the sky was clear, and somewhere in the house someone had put on music, soft and old and unhurried. "What is it?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched the man who had spent his whole life bracing for impact let go, finally, of the brace. "Home," he said, and this time on the cold stone terrace under the clear spring sky, with the maples standing guard and the apples sweet in the dark, and a sleeping child holding one of them in the library behind them this time. He kissed her. There was no script for it. There never had been. There was only the window, open at last, and the world rushing in, and two people who had stopped pretending so long ago now that they could no longer remember which weekend it had been, or which lie had turned, without either of them noticing, into the truest thing either of them had ever told. She had taken the job because the rent was due. She stayed because, somewhere between a borrowed ring and a green door with no sign, she had finally found the one thing no agency could send her and no contract could buy. A person who looked at her the way she looked at the paintings, not as something to be tolerated, not as something to be performed, but as something worth the patience it takes to uncover what was always, underneath all the grime and all the forgetting, simply, quietly, waiting to be found.